Jan has worked for the Forest Service from 1975 to 2010. He's had over 20 years working with the Forest Service in Montana and 15 in Arizona. Janet has been a research botanist, range conservationist, deputy district ranger, range staff, forest ecologist, and riparian ecologist.
Hello, and my name is Janet Grove, and I worked for the Forest Service for quite a number of years, and I'm honored to be here. I think the first question I want to ask is, just by show of hands, how many of you are students? Wow. Okay. Well, I'm also very honored to be here because, to me, you represent the hope for the future. And I was thinking just young people, but the first talk this morning was also, Dr. Brown. I realize that it's not just you that are in the middle of your educations. It's still people that are passionate and they're working very hard in their fields to encourage people to be involved in conservation efforts. When I started my education back in Nebraska, I'm from the Midwest. I was getting a degree in biology from the University of Nebraska, and I was going to do animal conservation. I was going to be a wildlife biologist. Until my junior year, I was taking ornithology, and by the third 7 o'clock in the morning laboratory of dissecting a pigeon that had been frozen and unfrozen 3 times, I decided that my calling was really plant ecology. And so when I graduated in 1975, with a bachelor's degree, I moved to Montana, and I went to the University of Montana, and I got a master's in botany, and I also got a job with the Forest Service. And 6 years later, for some reason, I don't know, decided to get another advanced degree. I got a PhD. It took me 8 years to do it, and I was working on an experimental project looking at timber sale practices and prescribed fire, a combination of treatments to manage coniferous forest that was whitetail winter range, one of the densest whitetail winter ranges in Montana. In those 20 years that I was in Montana before I came here, I had 6 different jobs. I was a research botanist. Then I worked as a regional ecologist during the first round of regional planning. I worked on research natural areas, and I did a lot of riparian classifications, grassland classifications, things like that. Then for some reason I was persuaded to become a range conservationist. In a little town on the Beaverhead National Forest in Sheridan, 600 people, mining, ranching community. I became a deputy ranger after that, and then I thought, no, that was enough of that for me, and I went back into range at a forest supervisor's level and worked on some riparian management guidelines. And the last job I had before I moved to Arizona was the Bitterroot National Forest ecologist, where I worked mostly on things like the Columbia River, large-scale analysis projects that looked at old growth and threatened endangered species. But that sort of became where the Forest Service began, driven by technology and large-scale analysis, and I'm a field person. So when the opportunity came up to come here and work in riparian areas, really, how many jobs in the Forest Service or any agency where you get to focus on one thing? So for 15 years, I worked on riparian areas in the Tonto National Forest. I want to say that the toughest job I ever had in my whole entire career was being a range con. I got to the Beaverhead right after the forest plan had been signed. And for the first time ever, there were riparian grazing guidelines in the forest plan. Not all forests in Region 1 had those, but the Beaverhead did. And so my job, I'm a new range con. I'm not really a city girl, but I'm not from a ranching community. And so my first job was working with the ranchers to implement riparian use guidelines for a group that really had never been done. And so, but I have to say that, I mean, I probably learned more than they did. And I learned a lot about the ranching community, and I have a lot of admiration and a lot of newfound respect for working with them. I mean, I'm not saying our values are the same, but they're heavily invested. You know, they're way more heavily invested than any of us, even with my job. And so I just learned, a new perspective. You travel the world and you learn a different perspective. So when I came here to Arizona, the first meeting I went to was a shared Fish and Wildlife Service and Arizona Game and Fish presentation, and they held up the poster with the aquatic species on it and fishes. And I remember being in shock because I'm coming from the northern region in Montana and Idaho. Almost every single native species on that poster had either an S on it for sensitive, or a T on it for threatened, or an E on it for endangered, or an X on it for extirpated. And Town National Forest plan was same era, 1986. And it was clear that the forest plan valued riparian areas. It had grand statements, management guidelines, that riparian areas we manage primarily for wildlife and watershed, and secondarily for commodity uses. John, you let me know when I have 10 minutes out, because maybe I'll want to just be quiet and take questions.
Yeah.
So, the other thing about the forest plan was there wasn't one practical standard or guideline that told us what was an unacceptable level of use in a riparian area. Not one. And it didn't really tell us what was acceptable either. 97, I'm just getting to know the area. 97, we had a drought. And the forest's reaction at the time was basically to accommodate the needs of our permittees primarily, because places were drying up. So we opened up all the allotments. The rotations kind of went out, and we opened them up. And I think at the end of that year, we realized that that was a mistake. And so by the time the 2001 drought came around, we had a lot more information. We've been developing ways to monitor and measure riparian areas. I couldn't believe when I got here in '95, there wasn't one appeal on a grazing allotment. I couldn't believe that. I've been living with them. NEPA in Region 1, mostly in timber, some on grazing. 2001, Latano reduced its stocking to 10%. So our permittees had to remove 90% of their cattle from our allotments. And much of that was foraged. It was a 1-inch precipitation year. What I understand, it was the greatest drought in 1,500 years. I go looking at free range. We didn't have water. And so we didn't want to overburden the riparian areas that we had. It was not without consequence, of course, and particularly to the permittees, but also to our agency as well. My preference for country being out is high elevation. I don't really like riparian areas all that well. They're noisy and you can't hear things and you can't see very well. But I realized when I wanted to work in range, I couldn't be a range con. It's just too hard. It's too hard, you're too responsible, and it's heartbreaking. But I can work on the edge. It's a little bit heartless because I can go to the range con and say, yeah, the problem, I'm going home and I'll help you tomorrow, So, but I decided that, particularly in the Southwest, that's where the issues are. That's where we really need to do work. And there's so little work that has been done on methods for how to measure things, on the science. Deer grass, there haven't been any publications. There's really no guidance on how to manage riparian areas. And so, it was a life's work. It was 15 years. And I have to tell you that at the end of that time, 2010, I planned to retire because I was done. As my friend says, that she's climbing 4,000 feet. I'm done. And I was done. I really wasn't leaving because I was angry, although I realize coming here today I do have anger issues. And, really, mostly from the Forest Service. And not even them, because it's the world. So now I'm going to talk about what I'm going to talk about, which is the topic is involving yourself in volunteer efforts on public lands. And I've really struggled with this. I've been traveling for 2 months because that's what I've been doing. My MO for the time that I have while I can still get out is I'm not volunteering. I'm not working. I think I've done 3 contract projects and given a couple talks. Today I don't know what to talk about. I can't tell you how to volunteer. I can't tell you how important wildlife areas are, or riparian areas are for wildlife. You guys know that. And I guess I would say, I want to talk about a few things. I was going to talk about the structure of the Forest Service a little, but I'm not going to do that. In terms of the 4 levels of the bureaucracy and the line officers, chief of the Forest Service, regional foresters, forest supervisors, district rangers, and then the rest of us are staff. I'm not going to talk about that. What I'm going to do a little bit on what I think some opportunities are for volunteering. And then I'm going to talk about NEPA. Most of the time when we talk about public involvement, y'all are thinking NEPA. And I have a lot to say about NEPA, but maybe I'll run out of time. So I'm going to talk first about volunteer opportunities. I would say follow your heart. All the presentations that have gone before me have illuminated opportunities to volunteer. And so you have to decide what kind of person you are. Do you like to work alone? Do you want to work with the support of people? Do you want to collect data? Do you want to get in there? Do you have a thick skin? Do you want to beat it up? We need all of you. We need those pugnacious, go to the mat people you just want to drag out of the meeting, And you also need the calms and the steadies. So there are lots of organizations. The Town of National Forest has Mothers for Clean Water. If you want to get out and backpack and go monitor streams, you can do that. Forest Guardians used to recommend adopted allotment. If there's someplace you love, someplace you hunt, someplace you go to all the time, that's where you need to go. And the way, don't ever underestimate the power of one. It's a book, I don't know the title, but The Power of One. My dentist, is an avid, he's a nature conservancy, he's a hiker. He loves to be outdoors. He came in the other day, his fir grass is dry, they're taking all this water out of the spring, and I said, sit down and write a letter. When the district ranger gets communication from someone, a citizen, they're just like, they don't know what to do. They're shocked. How much time do I have?
11 minutes.
Okay. They're really quite surprised, and they're very responsive to the occasional citizen that gets in with them. And so if you have a place that you really care about, and you want to get involved in grazing, it's tough. It's tough to do with the Forest Service, but you can get all of the public documents that pertain to that grazing allotment. You can get the annual operating plan. You can know where the cattle can be. You can work with the ranchers too. If you like, if you have a more antagonistic sort of nature, you can take that, but you can also, you don't have to be that way. I don't like conflict. I've never liked it, and I've had to know where my line is, so when I have to go to the mat, I go to the mat. So that's said about volunteering. I'm going to put with that. I just say follow your heart. You really have the time and energy. I'm looking around at some of the people that I've known, that have done this for years, and I'm thinking, I don't know how you can do it, because I just can't do it anymore. So I just want to, I don't have kids. The clock is, ticking. I don't have a lot of hope, really, and so it's all about me. It's all about me, getting out there and doing this while I can. I just got out of like an 8-day backpack trip. Couldn't go into the park. Couldn't go to Lake Powell for 10 days, so we went into Canal, Canal Creek, and got rained on and stuck on a beach for a day or two. So NEPA, I'm going to talk about NEPA, and I might read something to you. NEPA, in 1987, we were still really renewing permits without NEPA, and it was an administrative decision. There was a court case in California, the late 80s. The late 80s, and the Forest Service really, NEPA, originally the intent of it was to analyze the effects of projects that were planned, like timber sales, things that change things. Grazing is an ongoing issue. It's been going on, it's really been between the Forest Service and the permittee, to a large extent. And for a ski area, they just made an administrative decision to grant a permit, and they were sued. And the court said that's an environmental decision, and there are consequences. You don't do NEPA. Tom Klabunde, the deputy forest supervisor, said, you don't do NEPA. I guess what we do. So grazing then, all of a sudden, we began to have to do environmental analysis to reissue permits. Well, we fell behind, and lots of things. The Forest Service, in terms of how it's dealt with the NEPA requirements for reissuing permits, it's been very complicated. So I would say, if you are a citizen, unless you have a lot of time, and you have a 3-year time commitment, NEPA is out of your league for most citizens. It's complicated, and the permittee, of course, they're going to stay in the game. It's all about them and their livelihoods. But for the rest of you, I guess it'll be the environmental groups that can have the resources and the commitment and the time to stay with it. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying, even for myself, I can't tell you how many times we started on a project, we would get to the analysis, and we would drop it. I think on 100 grazing allotments in the town over my 15 years, I probably worked on 60. We got to decision on about 20. They were the easy ones. I felt like my role was, as an ecologist, was the information that we presented oftentimes made it difficult for the district ranger to make a decision, so they could continue its ongoing grazing. I look back at my agency now and the staff that we had in the tunnel, we're not there anymore. We made it difficult to make decisions. I just want to read something. This is from a person that I know involved in NEPA. Read the readers, and I have a few more minutes coming, just quickly. This is what we say about NEPA. We don't welcome people, the citizens, because we're always in a hurry, the Forest Service, to the next step. And there's no penalty for acting that way. But if the public pushes back, the law allows them to be involved as they want to be, short of getting everything they want. What I've seen over the last 6 years is a lukewarm desire from other agencies and even environmental groups to step up and ask for their seat at the table. Well, that's because there's like one or two of you, I mean, there's so many decisions going on, which one do you get involved in? You have to spread your energy. Everyone, not just the Forest Service, is going through the motions and ticking off boxes as we work through NEPA analysis. Few people are truly trying to be engaged. For example, if Arizona Game and Fish and other environmental groups wrote the kinds of letters to forest supervisors that permittees write, they would get more attention. But Game and Fish, just like the Forest Service, is a political agency. My closing statement will be this. Most every single one of us got involved in public land management because we're passionate. We're passionate about the land. What I had to learn to do is separate my passion from emotion. If you're a little too passionate on the job, you're done. You cannot cross the line where you are no longer credible. And if you're too emotional, you won't be credible. And you have to be aware of politics all the time and what you can sacrifice and give away. If you cross that line, once you cross that line in the agency, if you're involved in very difficult issues, you'll be discounted, and you can't afford that. And so I guess that's what I'll close with. This is my last example. When I went to the ArrangeCon, and it was my first experience. Of course, I'd been in research and things like that. You spoke the way I am now. I had a fellow tell me, we're going to get ready to meet with Conservation Society tomorrow and the Montana Extension Service and the permittee. I want you to tell me what's going on here. And I told them, when I was sitting, and I'm like this. And I learned those years on, as being a RangeCon, to talk like this. You talk softly, quietly, slowly. You get rid of all that inflection. You don't make people want to fight with you. And you sound like many of the speakers have sounded today. Very analytical and very rational. But deep down, every single one of them is seething. I'm done. So I hope that was informative, or at least worth sharing with you. And I'd be willing to entertain any questions, because at this point in my life, it's all very personal, and I'll tell you what you want. I'll tell you the answer.
I wanted Nancy to be here. She has a great perspective. Janet, sorry. Great perspective on what's going on. It really touches home to me about, taking the emotion away from the issue and trying to address the problem. John has a question.
I have a question in regard to NEPA and adaptive management. The Forest Service uses these words freely, adaptive management, but without outcome. And yet, under adaptive management policies, the agency has the opportunity to change management without doing NEPA and not having the extensive, time-consuming aspects of NEPA. And yet the agency typically, in regard to livestock grazing, chooses not to make adaptive management changes. Could you tell us exactly why they don't make those changes?
I'm not really sure how to answer that question, but I'm going to tell you something. The last grazing analysis that I worked on, my partner and I work with hydrologists. The effects of the alternatives that we wrote, our environmental consequences were lifted from the document. And the only place you could find them was in the project record. And I had discussions with AFSI and another group about this, and then nothing ever came of it. Adaptive management, the bottom line for adaptive management, unless a person like myself can write the environmental consequences, the agency is so stuck. I don't know how. Adaptive management gives them the ability to flex and do all these kinds of things, but the question is, what are the environmental consequences? How do you measure them, what you're looking for? So it's, I mean, I think the agency, I still talk to a few people, I think they're waiting for the next big lawsuit. So I just think adaptive management gives you some good flexibility, but the bottom line is, you know, when I would turn around and ask these people that are proposing these, well, how are you monitoring? What are you looking for? What are your answers? And I would just, you have to hone in and kind of, you have to pin them down. It's, on one hand, it's attractive, but if you can't write environmental consequences because you don't know what the hell the agency is going to be doing, then you're not getting a decision.
You know, the Forest Service now has Chapter 90 for grading NEPA analyses, and it's basically not an analysis up front. It's a stop and monitor, make adjustments down the road. But again, it's getting to that scenario where you're talking about is that the issues, the problems aren't analyzed up front and then definitive action taken. It's just, we'll see what happens, and after the issue or the problem occurs, then trust us, we will fix it.
You can't trust the Forest Service. I love the Forest Service. Let me go back. This, you know, that was slipping. The Forest Service is not any one person, you know, and so, but you know, in the Forest Service, you can't, Forest is about as functional as Congress. because it doesn't know what to do. You know, I mean, I would just view the agency as lost. It's looking for a mission. It's got too many things that it wants to do. And so you have to be dogged. I mean, you have to be, that's why I would say the best thing you could probably do is align yourself with a powerful group and help them. I would be willing to work for a powerful group. I sort of volunteer, no one ever calls me. I mean, I would actually be willing to go out and look at allotments and make assessments. But, you know, the Forest Service has dumbed down. When I was there was some, I had 15 years of experience. The people that were on my force that had all that experience are not valued, they're going away. And so the next person that comes in isn't going to be able to know what I know. So, you know, I don't know how to answer that question. Like I said, it's, I don't know how to answer that question.